The F1 Focus Podcast with MW Welman and Hendrik Verwoerd.
Welcome back to this rather harried episode of Formula One Focus. Hendrik, I'm in the middle of the building site, as I explained to you, so sorry for any unexpected noises. Welcome back. Good to see you again.
That's fine, thanks. Nice to be able to talk to you after quite an incident-filled United States Grand Prix, wasn't it? The whole weekend. I mean, it was a sprint weekend, so everything that we could have wished for almost absolutely happened.
Well, that's a good point you're making there. That was a sprint weekend. Is it still, Sainz said this weekend, now sprint needs a bit of adjusting and needs a bit of tuning. But it was certainly full of excitement and everything else. Let's talk about that sprint race that you mentioned just now. That first corner incident taking both McLarens out. I mean, talk about worst case scenario, worst you can possibly imagine, and it definitely came true. Is McLaren a team losing the plot towards the end of the season?
I think that's putting it a little bit too strong. And also, the worst possible case, I think the worst possible case is if that happened in the Grand Prix, not in the sprint race, because it basically just cost Piastri 8 points instead of 25 if it happened in the Grand Prix. But anyway, it wasn't a good situation for them to be in. I think Carlos and everybody else that calls for changes to a sprint weekend still have a point, and that's a different subject for maybe another day. And I think we've covered that in the past already. But after the first corner and after the two championship contenders were taken out, whether they took each other out or otherwise, that's maybe another point to be debated. But after that, it was a straightforward race, apart from George Russell, who was challenging Max Verstappen on one occasion. Very optimistic move when he came. I think it was Martin Brundle who called it. He came from a different postcode to try and outbrake Max. It didn't work. Max was a little bit, not quite happy about the situation that he had to take avoiding action to go off the circuit. Both of them went off the circuit in that corner, and that, of course, is the corner where everything happened last year between Lando and Max, where the whole brouhaha about, can you go offline or can you force somebody else on the outside off the circuit and that sort of thing, and that whole thing continued for the following weekend in Mexico, which is why we're looking forward to this weekend's Mexico Grand Prix as well. We can get back to that later. But yes, the big question is McLaren losing the plot? I don't quite think so. They didn't have an easy weekend, and it was all basically caused by that sprint situation. And also, I think they probably needed a normal weekend to be able to get all the data that they would need for a proper race preparation. They didn't have that. Neither did anybody else, of course, because they only had the one practice session. That led to them not in good positions in qualifying, and that led to them maybe not getting the cars off the line the way that they wanted to in the sprint race, and that led to the concertina effect into the first corner. I do think that Oscar was a little bit too optimistic there. Maybe if he hung back a little bit, he would not have been in such a difficult position. But then, of course, Fernando was in the area, and Zach Brown laid the blame squarely on Nico Hulkenberg's shoulders, and afterwards apologized for that, because it really wasn't just all his fault. But that's the nature of that corner. The first corner, it's a very wide entrance to the corner, uphill, of course, and uphill braking, and then turning into a corner that goes downhill straight after the apex, and narrows. It's the perfect formula for contact, multiple contacts, and it happens. It happens basically every time, except it didn't happen quite as badly in the Grand Prix the following day. So all those factors, I think, played a role. I think if Norris, and it's not my point, somebody else has made the point already, but I think it's a valid point. If McLaren maybe had sufficient data after practice to make the same decision that Ferrari made with Charles, and to put him on soft tires for the first stint, it could have been different, because then they could have both got off the line well.
We saw what happened in Singapore. Lando sort of bounced off Max into Oscar, and he had to bear the consequences, and I'm quoting. Oscar bounced off Nico directly into Lando and cost him his race. Cost both of them their races. Now, if you were strictly fair here, or being strictly rational, shouldn't there be some sort of a A penalty to Oscar. It wasn't his fault, but I don't think Singapore was Lando's fault either.
Consequences, I think that's the term that McLaren used after Singapore. Some sporting consequences for Lando. But the thing is, that's the kind of hole that we've been talking about that McLaren has dug themselves in. In the Singapore case, neither of the two really suffered any consequences for that incident, apart from the fact that Lando got ahead of Oscar. And then the team decided, okay, they're going to interfere in this situation in a sporting manner by giving Lando some sporting consequences. They wouldn't just define what those consequences were. I mean, and there was lots of speculation in the run-up to the United States Grand Prix about those consequences. Would it be that Lando would have the second choice in terms of the strategy? Would it be that he has to give his teammate a tow, during qualifying, stuff like that? It never happened, or as far as we could see. So that's the difficulty. Now, if in a case where both of them took each other out, now what does the team do? Do they now say, okay, it was primarily the fault of Oscar? Will they now, reverse those consequences for Lando afterwards? And it's just becoming ridiculous. You cannot have that sort of situation where the team involved themselves in the on-track situation after, as I said last week, after the Constructors' Championship has already been settled. Now let them race.
The standout thing for me for the sprint race was the fact that Sainz ended in third place on a podium. And I think it was directly attributable to the fact that looks like a Williams. Even though it's 1992, I love that color scheme.
The blue color scheme, yes.
I wish they would keep it. I mean, that car looks so good. I mean, in the race on Sunday, he just screwed it up. But still, that car looked fantastic, don't you think?
Yeah, and I mean, clearly Williams is on an uphill, on an upward trajectory. Throughout the season, they've had some difficult situations and disqualifications and stuff like that. But clearly the graph is upwards, and that is a very good sign, I think, for the future. And hopefully they can continue with that into the next season with a whole new dispensation. James Vowles has just been absolutely an incredible leader for that team ever since he took over a couple of years ago. So I'm so glad for that, because Williams is one of the teams that has been a stalwart of Formula One racing for so many years, a multiple championship winning team under Frank Williams. It would be so great if they can come back and join the likes of McLaren and Ferrari and Mercedes and Red Bull. Red Bull maybe not as long in terms of the history of Formula One, but certainly one of the stalwarts of the sport ever since 2005, for 20 years now. So yes, deservedly at the front there. But Williams, man, if they can only join there, it would be fantastic, I think, for the sport.
All right, let's talk about the race. How much of an influence did Oscar's accident in the sprint race have on the fact that he qualified so badly? Or if it's not to do with the fact that they had to rebuild the car, what was going on with Oscar? Why is he looking like he's wilting under the pressure?
Again, I think that's a little bit too early to say. He did have a bad race in Baku, yes, absolutely, and he is admitted that, and everybody is allowed. I think, as we've already said on this platform, everybody does have a bad day or a bad weekend every now and then. And he bounced back well. It wasn't, all that, strong in Singapore. And I do think that the accident in the sprint race on Saturday did have an effect on the way that they approached, both of them, that they approached not only the qualifying, but also, the start of the race into the first corner. They were both held back. I think mentally more so than anything else. I cannot tell you whether, the team wasn't able to bring that car to the absolute best spec because they had to rebuild the cars or portions of the cars. That I cannot tell you. But Lando had good pace. He certainly had good pace. And as I said earlier on, I think if McLaren, I think they've admitted that. I'm not sure that they actually admitted it, but they did say that they didn't quite consider that as a possibility to start him on soft tires. Charles was the only one that virtually, yes, in the whole field that started on soft tires. That gave him the impetus off the line from third to overtake Lando and to get into second position behind Max. And the hope was for Ferrari that he could actually make up two positions. Considering how that first corner plays out, it was quite possible for Charles to overtake not only Lando but also Max into the first corner. And that's what they tried. It didn't work, but he slotted into second position. And then basically that allowed Max to break away and to pull the gap, because Lando, who was clearly faster than the Ferrari, but he wasn't able to get past. He wasn't that much faster, and he wasn't able to get past until, about 20 laps into the race? And he got past, and then he had to do it again later on in the race because they cycled back in during the pit stop phase. And all of that basically allowed Max, I think, to have a more easy race than he would have had otherwise if Lando was able to either hold on to his second position off the grid, or being able to get past the Ferrari much earlier in the race and then able to close the gap. Because and I think even Max admitted afterwards that that would have been a little bit of a harder situation for him to deal with than the one that he eventually did have in the race.
You mentioned earlier that the McLaren driver held back a little bit, and nobody was more evident than Lando not being able to get past Charles. If he was more assertive, if he went for it like he would have done early in the season, I mean, I think that was quite clear. He was so careful of not going off the track, whatever. He took some funny lines. I watched on F1 TV, and Jolyon Palmer, David Coulthard specifically said the lines that he was taking into the corner, trying to attack Charles, was quite unusual almost, and indicative of being tentative.
Yeah.
You know, if you're too tentative, it's going to catch up to you in the end. And Max got nothing to lose. All he has to do is, give it his best, and he might just end up winning. And he's won how many in a row now?
Yeah, but I mean, Charles has also got nothing to lose. So Lando is the guy who's challenging at this point, the closest challenger for the title. Let's not forget that. Yes, Max is coming up, and it's absolutely remarkable the way that he's been able to close that gap. Will he be able to continue with that? We can get into that now. But yes, obviously, I think Lando would have been tentative, and he would not have tried to put himself. He would not have been in a state of mind that he would just absolutely go for it, come what may. Because, as I said, Charles has got nothing to lose. Lando's got a lot to lose if he puts himself in a position where he gets taken out of the race, obviously. So he's not going to do that. And credit to him, because that shows maturity, I think. It shows maturity of being conscious of the bigger picture, that, play for the points. If you cannot go for the win, try to go for the second, and don't run too much of a risk going for that second position. And eventually he did do it, and he did it twice, and two very, very good overtaking maneuvers on Charles, because Charles certainly made that Ferrari as wide as he possibly could. Even in the first stint, when the softer tires were starting to go off, he still kept him off for a long time before he had to concede. So I think tentative, and Piastri also, he had a bit of a race where he wasn't really a standout. He got one position off the line, and that's about it. So again, I think he was basically racing for what was possible, not what he really would have wanted.
Lando was quite clearly the faster car. I mean, even compared to the Red Bull. Why did Oscar then not manage to get past anyone? Barely struggled to stay ahead of Russell, who eventually fell back during the course of the race. Is it something to do with the car? Was it something to do with setup? Like I asked you earlier, there's something to do with the fact that the car was damaged. Something was wrong there.
Yeah. Well, again, very difficult to say. Basically, I think Oscar said, I think the one factor that did make a big difference was the change of direction in the wind from the Saturday to the Sunday. And that, of course, it was basically a 180-degree change of wind direction. And that obviously he felt affected him quite a lot in the way that he had to deal with the wind, especially through that SS part of the circuit, that wonderful bit of the circuit where you just see them go right and left, flat out. The Beckett's kind of complex, and that apparently because there the wind comes not only from in that section of the track, the wind came from the side. And that, of course, in an S section like that, it affects the balance of the car and the stability of the car, really, because wind comes from the side. I think maybe that affected him more. Maybe it was a mental thing. I don't know. But again, Oscar, he still is in the lead. He might have only a smaller lead now, especially against his teammate. I still think 40 points for Max is a big ask. It's not an impossibility, and we can discuss that. But it's a bigger ask, obviously, than the ask for Lando, who's now only 14 points behind. And for the two of them, the next few races are going to be absolutely crucial in terms of their positions in the title charge.
Let's talk about it now. The elephant in the room, the one that says two dogs fight over a bone and a third one runs off of it. Is Max actually going to be able to do it? I mean, it's never been done before. No matter what point system you were using, to come from this far behind and win the championship. But I suppose never before has Max Verstappen been the one doing the chasing. What do you think?
Yes. Yeah, and the thing is, of course, he hasn't got a teammate that can back him up. He's doing it all on his own this whole season long. And in fact, last season as well. So, it's absolutely remarkable the way that he's been able to close that gap from 104 points a 4 races ago to only 60 to only 40 points now. He's closed that gap by 64 points in 4 races. Yes, as you say, it doesn't matter what point system you use, that kind of gap for the eventual winner and earlier in the season hasn't been closed before. In many ways, this season kind of reminds one, and I think one or two of the commentators may have also mentioned this. In 2007, when Kimi Räikkönen came from behind and, the two McLaren drivers were fighting for the bone, Hamilton and Alonso, and in the final race, Kimi came back and he closed, I think, 17 points in 2 races, and that's the old point system. So Kimi came back from 3rd position. Also 2010, again, somebody mentioned that in 2010, Fernando Alonso was basically, the shoe-in for the title, but because of the McLaren mistake in the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, the strategy that they ran, and he got stuck behind that Russian driver in the Renault. The man who was in 3rd position that season, Sebastian Vettel, who had never been in the lead of the championship in 2010. He actually clinched it, and I was there that year. I was very fortunate to be there at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix that year when Sebastian then eventually clinched his first title, first of what would become 4. From 3rd in the championship in the final race. So that, that's I think that's a demonstration. You can come back from far behind. It can happen. But on the other hand, I think, this season also kind of reminds me of the 2009 season. You think back to 2009, Jenson Button eventually won the championship after winning basically every race in the first half of the season, and then everybody else caught up with him. And thanks to that gap that he had pulled initially, he eventually was able to clinch the title in 2009, despite everybody else closing in on him as the season progressed towards the end. Similar now, obviously, as like Max is now closing in on the two McLaren drivers. So, this is, and again, somebody else has said this is turning what would have been a fairly simple 2-horse race and fairly, maybe even predictable outcome into a very unpredictable 3-horse race. And yes, can he do it? That's your question. Yes, of course he can do it. He's closed that gap by that amount of points so far. Of course he can do it again.
Okay, just one note there. Fernando Alonso was, of course, Ferrari in Abu Dhabi in 2010, not McLaren. So,
of course, yes.
Yes, just as a matter of interest. The one thing we talked about last week was whether George Russell was ever going to get signed at Mercedes, and now he's been signed. Both him and Kimi Antonelli, a multi-year contract once again. We don't know how long it's going to be. What do you know about that?
Well, they say multi-year. In most cases, though, a multi-year contract is basically a 1-year contract with options for a number of years after that for both parties. So I would imagine that is probably the kind of contract that they have signed. Look, it's been on the cards for virtually the whole season, but again, I think I've made that point on a number of occasions on this platform that Toto Wolff would have been absolutely negligent as a team principal if he knew that Max Verstappen was possibly on the market and not to pursue that possibility. You cannot make the deduction that because he did that, he didn't have enough trust in George or Kimi to be able to continue next year. Max Verstappen is an absolute singular asset to any team, and there is no team principal, including Toto Wolff, who would not have liked to have signed him if they possibly could, if he did in fact leave Red Bull or did come on the market. So, that was absolutely right. The difficulty for Toto was, of course, that he had to still manage, the relationship with George and Kimi in that period. And so he had a kind of, had a bit of a juggling act to do. He had to keep a few balls in the air, Toto, in order to make sure that he eventually, can keep the drivers that he would like to keep. Most probably would have known that he would have had to sign with them anyway. But he still had to keep open the door. And we're going to see that situation again, I think, in 2026, at the end of 26 next year. Depending on how Red Bull fares with the new dispensation, it's quite possible that Max could become available in 2028. And that's why I think, Toto probably offered both these drivers a 1 year plus an option type of contract, because they would like to have, the freedom. I think both George and Kimi would like to have the freedom. If Mercedes, it's unlikely, but if Mercedes, misses the ball in 2026, they would also like to have the option of leaving and going to the team that eventually, or at that point, shows to be the best. So it's a kind of a win-win situation, I think, for everybody, because of all the uncertainties that are hanging over the 2026 season and the eventual or the projected outcome, the expected outcome of that season. Lots of uncertainties, not only on the drivers' market, but in terms of the Constructors' Championship, who's going to be competitive and who not. And we'll have to wait until February next year for the first test. The first test in January is going to be behind closed doors. We're not going to get a lot of information about that. The media they're going to be very, I think, clear and very strict about what access the media will have for the January test. And the first public test, I know, will only be in February. There are two in February, where the media will be allowed, and where one can then maybe start getting an idea of who's where in the pecking order for 2026. But just a starting idea, just a very, very tentative initial indication. I think we're going off the subject a little bit, but no. I think everything is tied to 2026. Literally just about everything happening in Formula One at the moment is tied to 2026.
We're not off the subject, we're entirely on the subject, because the entire reason why the delay was there was because of Max and the 2026, all the uncertainty and everything else. I just want to, I know this is a bit of a truncated episode, but this court case of McLaren versus Alex Palou, I mean, what a PR disaster is that now? And apparently Zach didn't really want Oscar there and everything else. Just briefly, what's your impressions of that, and what effect do you think it might have on a driver like Oscar? Hearing through the grapevine, or reading from a court case, that he wasn't really the first choice driver.
I don't know whether I really, to be honest, I really haven't followed that closely. I don't think, to me, it really has an effect on Formula One. It may have a larger effect on the bigger picture in IndyCar. And Palou, is he going to get his $30 million or $20 million or whatever he's asking?
McLaren wants $20 million from him.
McLaren going to ask? Is McLaren going to get that money from him or not? And how that is going to affect him and other drivers in possibly the same situation in IndyCar? I don't know. I really don't know. I haven't followed that closely. I do think that Oscar is probably at this point mature enough to know that what happened and what was said a few years ago, 3 years ago, when everybody was in a completely different situation. McLaren was completely, competitively, completely in a different situation. Piastri was basically just a test driver or reserve driver at that point. Would it matter to him now? I don't think so. No. I certainly don't think so. I think he's far too mature at this point, a few years later, to be able, or to be bothered by something like that. So, no, I don't think so. And I think, many times things are said in public, or is construed in public by media outlets that may not even be close to the truth, because it suits maybe a certain agenda, or it's a clickbait thing, or whatever. So things are then interpreted by media, and I and you, we are part of that. But we do that. We interpret things, and we try to read into things that may or may not be there. That's I think it's healthy to have that situation, because it also allows one to criticize.
you and I are a bit more careful or circumspect, I think, than most. Let's be honest. Let's call it what it is. Hendrik, I apologize for having to cut this short, but it's been challenging. You know what's going on around me. So thank you for this. Next week, we'll be back to normal and business as usual. Thanks, man. Thanks for making time for me.
Okay, all the best.
The F1 Focus Podcast with MW Welman and Hendrik Verwoerd.